Today on Great Sports Debates, we are starting a new series on the greatest football players, not necessarily of all time, but the last 40 years or so. So quick apologies to guys like Gale Sayers, Dick Night Train Lane, or Deacon Jones. You guys won't be on this list. The plan is to go by position group, highlighting the top tier in each position group. Now, I haven't put a number count on any position because I want to get that top tier, but we're not loading up with quarterbacks or, taking the easy route anywhere. This list is subjective, but I will try to explain and use numbers for my picks as well as context or, reasoning of selecting one player over another. Peak play and impact will edge winning and longevity. With that, we will start with the traditional defensive end position. Now this could be a one-person list, as the top guy here is in a tier by themselves. Not only was Reggie White the most dominant defensive end I've ever seen, I think he might be the most impactful player ever on the defensive side of the ball. Now I didn't get to watch him when he was at Tennessee, but I do remember the talks of his dominance. His senior year, he set numerous records, including 15 sacks, 4 of those being in one game, as well as having 100 tackles, 9 tackles for loss, and he also had an interception in that year where he was consensus All-American, Lombardi Award finalist, and the SEC Player of the Year, an award almost exclusively won by quarterbacks and running backs until it was split to offensive and defensive in 2002. And he did all this playing inside at the defensive tackle position, a spot he would occasionally be asked to play in the pros. After racking up 23.5 sacks in the short-lived USFL, White was picked 4th overall by the Eagles in the 1984 supplemental draft. After a late start to his first NFL season, White had 10 tackles and 2.5 sacks in his very first game and finished with 13 sacks in 13 games, despite not being able to start off with the team and camps and all that kind of stuff, and was named NFC Defensive Rookie of the Year. And let's be honest, he was robbed of a Pro Bowl selection that year. White had 121 games in 8 seasons with the Eagles with 124 sacks, including 21 in 12 games in the strike-shortened 1987 season, which is another record, averaging 1.75 sacks per game. He also held the record for passes defended by a lineman with 13, and White went on and became a free agent, moving to the lowly Green Bay Packers. He took them from run-of-the-mill team to champion, gaining 68.5 sacks in 6 seasons. He was twice NFL Defensive Player of the Year and should have won more. Just look at the stats. Look at the numbers. You got to watch this guy on film. He should have been the league MVP in 1987 and was clearly the most dominant performance by any defensive player ever. He wasn't an edge or an outside linebacker beating tight ends or running backs. He was clubbing offensive tackles. Every game he played, he was doubled and triple teamed. You couldn't just run at him like some pass rushers because he was elite against the run too. In 15 NFL seasons, he had 198 sacks, second all time by a wide margin. He was a Pro Bowler 13 consecutive years, and as we mentioned, it should have been all 14 years he played before his first retirement. He led the league in sacks twice, and was on the all-decade team of the 1980s and the 1990s, as well as the 75th anniversary team, and the 100th anniversary team. He could literally club giant men off their feet with one hand. Now, we mentioned Reggie White is in a class by himself, but I'm going to add two more guys from the next tier, and one of them might be a surprise. J.J. Watt does not have the big career sack numbers of guys like, say a Chris Dolman, but he did more and his peak was higher. Watt may have only had 115.5 sacks for his career, but he is 5th in sacks per game behind Reggie White, DeMarcus Ware, and two active players, Von Miller and T.J. Watt, his brother. I remember this guy's work ethic at Wisconsin and really hoped he fell to my favorite team, the Detroit Lions. Watt also plays the run and is second all-time for tackles for a loss at 195. He also broke Reggie White's record for pass deflections in 2012 with 16 for a lineman. Watt's, I'd say, 2012 to 2015 run might be unrivaled, as he led the NFL in sacks, tackles for loss, and quarterback hits by a huge margin. Just look at the numbers. Leading the league in sacks twice during that 4-year span, tackles for loss 3 times, and QB hits all 4. He's the only player to have 50 quarterback hits in a season, and he's done it twice. He's also the only player to have multiple 20-sack seasons. He and Reggie White are the only ones to have 3 or more seasons of 17.5 sacks. Also in that 4-year span, Watt captured 3 NFL Defensive Player of the Year awards, tied with LT and Aaron Donald for the most ever. He was a 4-time first-team All-Pro in those 4 years and was runner-up for the MVP. And I think in a player voting, it's like the NFL top 100 type deal, he was like number 1, number 2, a lot of those years. This guy was also a member of the 2010s team. Now, I know his career numbers don't necessarily match up to some of the other guys that could be considered, and this pick will probably get the most heat. Go ahead and hit me up in the comments. Guys like Chris Dolman, Richard Dent, Charles Haley, who I love, or Peppers, who, maybe I underrate him because I always expected more. But I really just can't ignore how dominant the peak was for J.J. Watt and how he changed games in so many ways with forced fumbles, interceptions, pass deflections, sacks, tackles for loss, and quarterback hits. He, like Reggie White, were guys that could literally change the game, just from their dominance at the defensive end position. Now, the last guy I'll add to the group is another obvious one, as Bruce Smith is the all-time sack leader with 200 sacks. To say he was Mr. Consistency would underrate his dominance, as he also has the record for double-digit sack seasons at 13. And this is all while playing out of a 3-4 scheme that's much less friendly to getting sacks. Bruce Smith is also a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, 8 times first-team All-Pro, and 2-time second-team All-Pro. He led the league twice in forced fumbles and was on the 1980s and 1990s All-Decade teams, as well as the 100th anniversary team. There might be a couple of guys who had a higher peak, maybe, but there's no way it was enough to challenge his excellence for so long. At this point, I'd like to add honorable mention to guys like Julius Peppers, Richard Dent, Michael Strahan, Chris Dolman, Charles Haley. I'm sure there's a few that I'm missing as well. Plus, there's a lot of older guys, Deacon Jones or like the Leroy Salmons and Howie Longs, who, you know, I didn't watch, or I only watched part of their career that just quite didn't make the cut. Or, you know, obviously future guys like, you know, the Bosa brothers, or, you know, plenty of people recently that, you know, we're just not looking at quite yet for the defensive end position. Let me know in the comments below who I missed or who you expect on the next group, which is going to be defensive tackles. Also remember, it's kind of hard with the way the NFL does, you know, so many teams have different positions and how guys are categorized. We're also going to have at some point that outside linebacker / edge position, which might cover some of the other guys that you're thinking about as well. So with that, thanks, like, subscribe, share, and as I mentioned, let me know what I missed in the comments. Thanks a lot.